In this video I want to go through the updated pipe builder HDA, what I have done it and how I did it, and for the download you can download it in the description. It's basically an updated version. So first of all, we're gonna talk a little bit about Zbrush import. So now it's much easier, you don't have to have a specific naming convention for the Zbrush tools. You can see what I have here is all the subtools. The names do not matter anymore, because what I have done is, let's go back to the Houdini. So if we go inside HDA, so for the naming it's very simple. So let's go to the Z tool name, and for every import there's now a for each loop. So let's say we have goZ import. For all the goZ import connections, let's go inside it. You see there's a sub for each loop. So first of all, what we have to do is basically for each named group. So when we import from Zbrush, it's automatically gonna give its name attribute for it. So in our loop, what we are doing basically for each name of the subtool that we import, we're gonna give it a attribute called bolt, and it's going to be just a simple int value. And after that, all we are doing outside this for each loop, we are basically deleting the anything but that group that we select. So we have a detail selector, which is just basically our selector. So let's say I want to our detail 1, and however subtools we had, we can select between all of these details like that. So that's that, and just make sure it's on a y-axis, so it's actually on the z-axis like that, so it works, so you don't have to manually rearrange it when you create ZBrush. So that's a very simple way that we can automate our part selection. So next one is the auto UVs. So for that, let's go to the sweep tool. So we have two types of our curves. So remember we had a kind of this more organic looking and the kind of a classic looking tubes. So first of all, in the sweep node SOP, there's a UV attribute, great. So what it does, if you take a look at it, basically will create a UVs for our tube. But first of all, we need a little bit of a space for it. So what we do is just transform it. All I do is squish it a bit for the 0.6. So majority of UV space is still for the tubes, and the same thing as in here. We just squish it a bit. It's a reference for that one. So we squish it and then we merge it down. So we have in one UV island we have all of the tools we need. So for the parts of it, it's inside these green boxes. So let's take a look at auto UV. So for the flanges, so let's take a look. So first of all, we have whatever flange we select. So because since in a HDA we can actually select from the either ZBrush, or we can model our own custom one and then we connect it in here, or we can use a default one. But default one is kind of very basic, so whichever we use, then we auto UV it, and then we auto UV layout it. So for the flanges, that's a bigger part of it, so we are using the most of the UV space. You can see that that's the rest of it. So this is already by the tube. This is not available for it, but for this, basically use this 1, 2, 3. So it's 10, 80% of the rest of the space. And remember, if your UV do not come out right, just go to the auto UVs and just play with this merge tolerance. You see, if we change the merge tolerance, let's select auto UV, and you can see it play around with merge tolerances, so you get a better unwrap if something doesn't go right. So then and it's UV layout node is just going to squish it in our available UV space. For the bolts, it's the same thing. Let's go to the bolts. It's also in the green boxes. So for auto UVs, also for each bolt, because we can have let's go outside. So basically we can have different bolts on both sides. So in here and here. So that's why we have two selections for it. So just auto on UVs. Just play with merge tolerances, it doesn't really work for you. And then UV layouts into each one of these are into these 3 squares. only the different ones, and that's it. Then it switches, and that's it. These switches are for the, I'm going to show it later. So one thing you might want to do is actually bake out the high resolution detail for these bolts. So what I have done is here is just a pre-setup for the baking. So what it is we are basically just, whatever you're going to copy it, it's going to go to the merge node, and then it's going to lay it out for ready for the baking. So what you do is bake out before the actually we are copying these points to the points and to the flanges. So this is just every unique part only merged together, and if you want to, you can bake out with the round shader all of these parts, and it's already UV'd, so that's for the setup if you want to bake out. Or if you have a higher enough resolution for these, you don't even need to do it. So depends on your application. So I did not set up for the baking, but if you do, this is not for the baking, and you can do it easily with it. I have plenty of videos for the baking. So that's it. Everything else is pretty much the same, and only difference is that we go outside here. There are a couple options added for that to make UVs. So first of all, because you do a lot of changing and maybe you want to change how it looks, how your pipes looks, making UVs, just disable it. So it's basically going to bypass all the UV making for the flanges and bolts, because it does take a little bit of time. So when we have disabled it, we can easily then select the parts without making UVs. And then when you like the things that you have made, let's say I like this one, all you have to do is just press on make UVs. It's going to create a UVs. Because if you select make UVs and change the parts, you can see it's actually going to take a little bit of time, because it actually has to render out the UVs. Well, it's not even that bad, but sometimes it's pretty bad, so for the bigger parts. So just a option if you need it. So make UVs, and also the colors. So there's a delete color option. That is just basically for the better visualization. So when we let's say export out this mesh, we're gonna maybe need a ID map. So now it's kind of intrusive to look how it's maybe gonna look like without these crazy colors. So delete colors, and when you're ready to bake it out, to render it, to export it, just press and delete. Make sure make UVs, and then just with the FBX node you can save to disk, and in Substance Painter you can basically bake out with the vertex color ID map. So you can easily assign materials for each one of these. The switches are, I really don't know much about the switches, but how they are made is basically for each one of these there are switch, and for the switch there's so this is going to be there is a master switch. So there's a master switch, which is every color one is referenced to this switch. So you can see this master switch, and its reference is the local make UV switch. But every other switch is now referencing this master switch. So you can see it goes outside this node, and its reference is this switch, so that so all of these UV nodes get rendered out together. So we don't have to 3 master switches to create UVs for each one of these. It's switch, basically what I did is in a type properties, you just drag in a toggle, and then you just drag this toggle inside this select input. You can see it's referencing this select input, and that's it. It's basically going to either activate it or disable it, like that. So I think that's it pretty much. Let's visualize our UVs. Let's delete this color. Actually color. Like you can see, we're getting pretty good UVs. Let's do some quick texture for these parts. So let's first of all, since I exported with vertex colors, go to the make meshes and just select an ID map. And with the vertex color, bake it out. See, now we have our ID map for every part of it. So let's say I want to add some sort of material, maybe this one, red one. We can actually go to the with color selection, select which part we want. And the only thing I wanted to show in here is that to make these UVs actually repeat, all we have to do is go to the here and actually squish it down to the actual part where we have our UVs like that. You can see now we're getting continuous UVs because these UVs are set up to be continuous, so they do loop around. So all we have to do is squish it down to the UV space that we actually have, and now we're getting continuous UVs for our tubes like that. And what else? For the ambient occlusion map, there is one thing to note. You can see it's going to ambient occlusion. So you can see these parts are nice for the ambient. Let's take a look at ambient occlusion. You can see these parts are nice and it's going to work nice with smart materials, but there's one problem with this, since we are copying our UVs, they do not exactly match to where they should be. So one thing to do, you can just go to export this map and just in Photoshop or whatever, just paint out this with white color. That's it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed this HDA update and learned a couple of tricks you can do. And see you next time, and take care.